The South Florida Cultural Consortium is funded in part with support from the National Endowment of the Arts, the Florida Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs, and the Florida Arts Council, the Board of County Commissioners of Broward, Miami-Dade, Martin, and Monroe counties, and the Cultural Council of Palm Beach County. I'm thrilled at the opportunity to listen to this group of artists selected from the South Florida Cultural Consortium. This exhibition, in my time here at MOCA, has always felt like a wonderful homecoming and like a welcoming of all the faces that I've grown familiar and fond of in the South Florida scene. And I really appreciate the dedication and sensitivity to which this particular exhibition has been curated by our in-house curator, Adeze Wilford. So with this, I'd like to invite our panelists up to speak tonight. And I hope you all were able to get some food and some drinks, and thanks to Tripping Animals for coming out and providing some delicious beers. So please come on up and a warm round of applause.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to be in conversation with such a wonderful group of artists. For me, organizing this exhibition was such a joy because I'm fairly new to South Florida. I'm very new to MOCA, and to be able to see such a wonderful group of artists, my first full year curating here, has been just a really fantastic introduction to the South Florida art scene. So I'm thrilled and delighted to be in conversation with all of you tonight, and I appreciate you trusting MOCA and me with your artwork. So to start the evening, before we get into questions about your individual practice related to the works in the show, I wanted to actually have each of you have a moment to share about your own practice before we jump into questions. And so we can just kind of go down the line. Amanda has a presentation that kind of has work from each of you in it, and we give you each 5 minutes to kind of go over your work and how you kind of got to where you are today. We're gonna turn the lights low so that you can see the work a bit clearer.
All right, that's me right there. It was like 3 years ago. No, 5 years ago. Anyway, these images actually they're going to be. I'm going to talk about them later. But if we can go to our to what's at MOCA right now, please. And I'm going to start there. But anyway, good evening. My name is Gabino A, Castelán. I am honored to be part of this group of talented artists. It is a privilege to exhibit in this fine institution that has been running since 1981. Thank you, Adeze, Shauna, Sophia, Jessica and Ransom from Palm Beach Cultural Council, and Amanda Sanfilippo. And of course, thanks you guys for coming out this evening. So my family has been growing, and we had our firstborn. She's a year old and a month. And I feel blessed. So I want to thank my wife for the family she has given me. Anyway, it's so magical that we all start as small clusters of cells. Then our heart develops first with powerful heartbeats. Our brain starts developing too. And our brain guides our heart to have a heartbeat with rhythm. That's the artist I am working to become, to follow my intuition and reflect my emotional and intellectual concerns. I went through every phase of art making, right? But I dedicated myself to a certain kind of process for internalizing the logic of painting. And what I learned, so that I could find a way to synthesize and put them together and create my own image that I can actually call my own. These works are done with colored pencils, gold leaf and silver leaf, collage, acrylic paint, image transfers, and I also add some materials. I add some leather, some beads, some string. So each medium that I use has a historical value. And I think the way I make it says something about the origins of making art, and what painting is. So for this exhibition, I created a site-specific installation that combines perspective of murals, unconventional stretch canvas paintings, and works on paper. My work references the term Nepantla. It's a word used by Nahuas. So Nahuas is the people from Central America, Mexico. So Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. And what this word represents is the concept of in-betweenness. For the Nahuas, Nepantla is the space between two bodies of water, the space between two worlds. It is where you are not this or that, but you're in the midst of transformation. The Nahuas further refined the term to describe their experience of creating their own in-between culture under Spanish governance to maintain their traditions. So in this body of work, I'm using the concept of Nepantla as a way to portray the laborer's everyday life in fictional realms where multiple forms of imagery transfigure to produce many narratives. So through my process, I paint the worker as a phenomenon on an epic journey of metamorphosis and acknowledge the tragedy of economic exploitation, as well as depict the human figure to identify and anchor ourselves in our humanity and remind us that we are human and very basic. We hunt, we gather, we work, we trade, we love, we die, we give birth, we marry. In this work, I venerate the laborer universally because they create the commodities that sustain modern life. So through images that I get from books or from the internet or from pictures that I take, my artworks, they portray movement, they illustrate wilderness sites to convey stability, and I reveal very snippet portraits of freedom fighters from the Americas. So there is ambiguity and mystery embedded in the artwork's materiality, but also in the visual narrative. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabino. We'll move to Carin to talk about her practice now.
Hello, I'm Carin Wagner. Apologize for the mask. I hope you all can hear me. How do you all feel about trees? Does anybody have a favorite tree or a favorite tree memory? Yeah. So, trees are amazing. Did you know that they actually create the ecosystem around them? That transpiration is the process of them drawing water up from the roots through their trunk and releasing it into the air, and that actually creates the climate around them. And evapotranspiration is an entire forest and all of its surface and soil releasing into the air the water that then becomes the water cycle. So when you cut all of the trees, it affects the climate. So my first tree painting was inspired by an orange jasmine tree that was just alive with zebra butterflies. The second was a laurel oak sapling, quiet in the moonlight. Examining leaves in close detail and the reflections of trees in water consumed years, all of it leading me into a deeper knowledge of what trees do for all of us. As I was completing a large-scale tree portrait of a sycamore tree whose human form just stunned me. The arms were held high in the air, dancing joyously. I was completing this, and I read the book, The Overstory by Richard Powers. And I don't know if any of you have read this book, but it affected me deeply. The love for trees and their munificence reflected in every interaction between people and the trees. And then shortly afterwards, I read an article in the Washington Post by the science writer Gabriel Popkin about the loss of biodiversity in our forests. He specified ash trees as particularly threatened due to the emerald ash borer, which is a type of beetle that was imported accidentally from Asia on a shipping pallet, and which has now killed hundreds of millions of ash trees in our forests. So he had a photo of a blue ash tree that reminded me of that painting of the sycamore tree because of its human form. And my mission became clear at that point. It was highlight the individual trees that we stand to lose in a way that hopefully engages people and informs them about each tree's role in the ecosystem. So I go out. First, I research each one of the trees and where it's located. And I travel, if I am able, and group them all together, if I can, in a region. Go and find the trees, photograph the trees, and then collaborate with people who are editing to help me remove it. They're doing that work to form the negative of the tree that then symbolizes its removal from the environment. So that's the ghost body that you see. And then while they're helping me with that, I'm spending thousands of hours, layer upon layer, doing the paintings that show what we stand to lose if these trees are removed. And that's just the beauty of them. It has nothing to say about all of the life that each one of those trees supports. Each one of the trees supports different insects, and those insects feed the birds, and the birds feed other animals. So it's a cycle that once we lose those trees, the animals are gone also, along with the trees. So that's my mission. And there's an exhibit right now, 16 of the trees up at the Cultural Council for Palm Beach. So it's a slightly larger one than this, and 3 of the large-scale paintings. And these are from that exhibit, their opening. Thank you.
Thank you, Carin. And then, Carrington, if you want to share a little bit about your practice.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrington Ware. I am a digital artist. I do work in other mediums. So technically, I am a multidisciplinary artist. I'm sorry, I don't have the mic up to my mouth correctly. But so behind me is an animation that I have on my website. I've been working in I've been working in digital art since I was an undergrad student in Georgia, and then I came here to Florida and I continued that practice. So 2 of the works that are here are also an extension of that practice. Yes. Yes. So this work is currently on view here. It is Reimagined Memories. It is a digital experimental archival video of my parents' stories. They are from Georgia, and so when I was little, they would always tell me stories about how they were growing up and things that they did, and I always find those stories very fond and very dear to my heart. So I wanted to create something based on that. It is appropriated video, so I scoured the internet for all of these like little meaningful things that related to what they always told me about growing up in the country, and I put it all together, and it's just very dear to my heart because they're very private people, so I had to figure out a way to kind of show their life without really having them in it. The voices that you hear in the video are their voices, so that is technically the only part that's really them. But everything else I had to find and line it up with what they were saying. A lot of it was, cut out, and then finally I just got the perfect story. And then it is projected on 6 tin roof panels, and that is indicative of my grandmother's house. She had, if you go to any rural kind of state in the Deep South, you're always gonna see like a rusted tin roof at some point, and going to her house, that's what I always remember and saw, and that's what's really fond to me, so I decided to project it on that. And it's almost like a moving photograph with this work. And so this work is a little bit more personal. It's Black Girl, a montage. And though it does have current music artists and icons in it, like Megan Thee Stallion, I was really pulling from childhood, things that I used to look at when I was little, big moments on TV, like with TLC and Sierra and all those shows. And they're really dear to my heart. And even though it is, you know, a kind of collective memory of the 90s, which I don't know if anybody knows, in the 90s, it was one of the top times for like Black representation on TV. Could it have been better? Yes, but it was, it was my representation at the time. And I just remember looking at all those girls on TV and being like, I want to be this when I grow up. And I always had a TV on the floor, which is why it's low to the ground, because it's supposed to be reminiscent of me being a kid and being smaller and sitting and looking. So I just decided to montage all of those things together to kind of make a message of what I wanted to say about the work and about that time period, being a little Black girl and just wanting to kind of give myself that message. So that is what that work is about. And that's it.
Thank you, Carrington. So we can either do, Moira, we can go down the line, or Francesco, if you want to jump in. It's a dealer's choice. Okay, perfect.
There I am. Okay, so thank you. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm Moira Holohan, and I'm a multidisciplined also artist. I wanted to say thank you, Adeze and MOCA Nomi and Miami-Dade. This has been an amazing experience. I explore poetic tensions and questions in art history, in contemporary culture, and personal context in my work. I use figuration, and hopefully sometimes I have some humor. The images that I am showing you is part of a collaboration. It's the first collaboration, and what's in the gallery now in the museum is the second part of our collaboration. The other person is my husband, but he's also a geophysicist. And we've been together for maybe 20 years, and I looked over to his radargram, which you can see. Oh, sorry. One more word, sorry. Yep, there. There, and I was just like, that looks like a weaving. So we started from there, and we did one collaboration in Maine, and this is the work that we started there. And then the one in the gallery is another collaboration where he was looking at sinkholes or potential sinkholes, and I used one of his radargrams, the diagrams similar to this, and created another narrative to it through textile and video. So just maybe a little bit more. So this is maybe the work, I'm sorry, yeah, the work, the slide before. Go back to, sorry. So I also had in 2021, non-collaborative, I guess, or actually collaborative with de Kooning. I did a show at Emerson Dorsch in 2021, and just kind of a link that we're going to be talking about later of like how I use textile and video together. A key component, it's the reason why I started working with video in grad school, was green screen. So green screen has not only been a way to incorporate textile to the video, but it's also been a way as a signifier, something that can be a portal, something that somebody else can replace whatever they want into. So in this gallery, I did use this as video for videos, but the green screen is there as signifier. And then in the other slide, This is my beginning to work with textile as animation. So the eyes, I zoomed in on eyes of certain women paintings by de Kooning and had them wink. So there was about 5 series, and now what you're seeing in the gallery at the museum is an actual 10-part series of textile animation. So, but this was kind of the beginning of that textile and animation combination. So, and this is like a video. The video that you see in the museum as well is using the textile, using the 10 frames, but also incorporating the green screen, taking that out, putting my body in, and then working on the stills in a flip book form. So it exists as a flip book. And this is one of the flip book animations I did for that show, where my body's included, de Kooning's included, my studio's included, and each frame is like a little painting that I just quickly worked on and then rescanned to animate. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Francesco Lo Castro. Thanks for coming out on a Wednesday. What pictures did you pick for me? My portrait, for starters, is very good. Okay, cool. I'm Italian. I grew up in Germany. I've been in South Florida for 30 years now. And I work in abstraction. It wasn't always like this. I kind of found abstraction over many years. Been doing this type of work since 2012, I would say. And I've always been fascinated by just the expanding boundaries of what we call reality. And I feel like the best way for me to kind of visualize that sort of philosophy is to put together compositions of color and shape and create this almost alien language with it. And so it's very intuitive. I don't really know what I'm doing, and yet it feels so right. And so every painting, every sculpture, every animation I do is always kind of another step forward into a real mystery zone. And I really enjoy that process because I'm really more spectator than I am creator, or at least I'm somewhere in between. And I really, really enjoy that and have a lot of fun with it. As far as media and materials, I'm kind of, I go all over the place. I'm really not too tied to any specific media. Anything goes, really. It's really, if it fits into like an overall vision that kind of exists between past and future and creating some form of a contemporary idea of what I feel is happening at the moment, then I make it work. Yeah, I've done large-scale installations, which one of them is here at the MOCA for this show. Very specific small-scale paintings. I started as a traditional painter, then went into abstraction. Then these paintings started to become more and more three-dimensional and sort of organically became sculptural. Then the sculptures wanted to become their own environments and rooms, and so the thing just kind of took on a life of its own and grew and starting to animate itself now. And I'm just kind of following along, so that's it.
So I think it's always helpful to kind of ground ourselves with the history of artist practice and where they are now, and then jump into the specificities of what's on view in the show. And I had a couple of questions for each of you. What I'm going to do is not just stick so that you're talking for a very long time, and we'll just bop around. But Gabino, I'll start with you, and just really wanting to dig into the perspective that you use within your work and the site-specific installation, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but this idea of investigating these nonlinear conversations about time that you're having within the work, and I'd love for you to talk about that more.
Of course. Well, I consider perspective as a time machine. But also, I also see it as a telescope. But I'm not the only artist who uses nonlinear narratives. I think one of the oldest works of art that we all know that uses that type of narrative is the Bible. And the Bible has, I remember my mom, well, I grew up in a very Catholic environment, right? And my mom, I used to see my mom twice a day was reading the Bible. And I was like, okay, it's cool, you know. I was a teenager, you know, every teenager goes through a phase, right? But then one day my mom was like, come sit down with me. So I was like, okay. I sat down with her and she wanted to talk to me about the Bible. And I was like, she was like, that the Bible is non-linear. And in the books, you know, like Genesis and Revelation, they're not in chronological order. And then she was like, each book stands alone as its own work. I'm like, wow, okay, that's cool. So we have this massive book, right, that has all this knowledge, right, or information for, you know, for us to, as a way to understand our world, understand where we come from, or et cetera. And I was amazed by knowing that. So for me, perspective has been part of my work, I guess, for the past 5 years now. And the reason why I use perspective is to create interesting architectural compositions for the viewer to sense visual space and time. It's a way to pull them into the work and welcome them, and at the same time offer them entrance and exit viewpoints. I'm sorry, for the eyes and minds to wander about and engage with color, with shapes, with material, movement, and spatial structures. That's pretty much what my work is about, like visually. And then the whole stuff about research comes in, you know. But a lot of my work, it's even my own process is very nonlinear, you know. And the most basic thing, when we talk very, very nonlinear as humans. But our brains, they love linear patterns. That's, you know, we want instructions, you know, this, and that. And one of the films that I really like that has also a way of non-linear narrative is Space Odyssey. I don't know if you guys seen it. It's a long one. And also this book by James Joyce. It's a pretty hard book to read. I don't even understand it. I read it once, and I bought it, and I bought the book, and I'm going to try again to read it. But this book also has a very nonlinear narrative. So it's called Finnegan's Wake. So going back to illusion of depth, why do I bring it into my work? Well, it's been part of the artist's vocabulary, you know, ever since. You know, we before perspective came around. It came around maybe around 5th century in Greece. A lot of painters were using scale, of the shape or figure, overlapping, you know, the hues, the detail, or the tone, just to create the special depth, you know. So I do the same thing in my work. You know, my work it follows the history of painting, you know. But it's not just Western painting, you know. I'm thinking also about, like, you know, the Aztec codices, you know, like they were the way these not one artists were painting. They did not know perspective after they were conquered by the Spaniards. There's this book called The Florentine Code is Number 6. And in that book, you could start seeing now artists using perspective in their work. Now, why do I find this interesting? Well, because it's just a way that artists are having conversations. Even back in the then, and I mean now, we can easily have conversations with our peers. We could call them up or go to the studios. But back in the day, a lot of these artists were so far away, but they were making amazing remarks of how to tell narratives by using visual depth. So that's where I will. That's what I have to say for that question.
Thank you. Carrington, I want to go to you next because you started talking about this during your presentation about the two different works and how they have very specific influences or reference points to your life. And I'm very curious and interested in how you're using memory in very different ways. So the source material from more popular culture, and then also the source material from your family and like mining your familial relationships to form this narrative. And how were you navigating between the personal and the communal?
I think they're both very personal for me. So with Reimagined Memories, it's me kind of honoring and showing more respect towards my parents and maybe not even having having certain boundaries with that because they have their certain boundaries. Again, like I said, my parents are very private, so I have to keep that in mind. I also have to keep in mind the way that I'm mining these experimental, archival, appropriated moments on the internet. They also belong to somebody else as well, so they have their own autonomy, so I have to be mindful of that as well. And then just putting it together in a way that's respectful kind of to both parties, while also still telling the story of my parents and telling the story in a way in which I remember it. So there are a lot of layers with that one, even though it's a little bit broader in context. I remember when I was making it, I was looking at a lot of works from Gordon Parks' segregation story, and I took that book home, and they were like, "Oh, this was our childhood, and these were things that happened," and that's kind of what inspired me to make it. It's because we have a lot of photos. They have a lot of photographs, but there's not a lot of footage. And if there is footage, it also does not typically belong to Black people. It belongs to another archive. So I kind of had to do an Arthur Jafa and just kind of steal it and appropriate it to make this story and narrative. And then with Black Girl, a Montage, that was a little bit easier because it was in such a broad context. Even if it's not globally broad, it was broad within the Black community. So I had like a lot to pull from there. And anytime I'm making any work, I just think of, me being like a little kid, and it's like, how do you want this work to feel and look, and what memories do you want to pull from it? Like, how do you want your audience to feel? There's kind of this philosophy that when you make something, it's not fully complete until somebody interacts. So, sorry. Thank you. So when you're making something, you also have to be, mindful of your audience. But for the most part, it's mostly my memories of being a little girl. So I just sat down and wrote down like everything. I was like, who do I remember? Whose voice needs to be in this? Like, who needs to be represented? Who's not represented? How much of myself is in this? So both works pull from very personal memories, but one is deeply personal to myself and to like Black girlhood and growing up. And again, that work is arranged to have a kind of message to Black girlhood. There's a lot you have to go through being a Black girl, and so that work is kind of like a message to me as a little girl, and while the other work is kind of just an honor to my parents for them raising me, their lives that came before me, and just pulling those things together.
Thank you. I do have to say that I love what you did with Black Girl in Montage, because there's a moment where there's the Just For Me jingle, which if you were a Black girl growing up in the 90s, aspirational hairstyles on those boxes. But then you tie that into Angela Davis having a speech, and there's just this really poignant balance between pop culture phenomenons, but then really striking messages from political figures, which I think makes the work so valuable and interesting. So thank you.
Thank you.
And Francesco, we can talk a little bit while we figure out what's going on with the screen, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about related to your work is this kind of jump and risk that you took with the color palette. And we had talked about how coming into this, people have a very particular understanding of the palette that you use and have very particular expectations for what they're going to see in an installation that you put on view. And I loved that you used this exhibition as a way to explore something that people would not necessarily expect from you. And so this color palette of like the dusk and the dawn really felt like a new step within your work. And I'd love for you to talk about those like more formal aspects.
Yeah, I like to listen to just the energy of a moment, and it just felt like the right moment to do something of this sort. For anyone who doesn't know, my previous work was a little more South Florida inspired as far as color palette, light pastels, just brighter overall. Overall, if you want to look at it that way, maybe more inviting. But I think that this was equally so, but certainly posed a challenge because I just really wanted to dial it kind of 180 degrees into a different direction. And at the same time, it felt like the right moment to do that. I almost felt like things had shifted just in the general culture, and for me personally, maybe. And so all these things put together, just the kind of show I put together felt like the truer exhibition that I could have pulled off. And I want to thank you and the MOCA to even just go, yeah, sure, let's do it, because I was preparing for a fight, which didn't happen. So, but yeah, simultaneously, I'd kind of stashed away all these darker pieces that I had sort of accumulated over time and never shown. It didn't feel appropriate or the right moment. Something was just kind of brewing. These things usually start to brew over like a certain period of time, and then they become a show. And so that's kind of what happened here. And once it sort of coagulated, I realized that it was a really good statement on a moment of uncertainty, really. At least that's the way I perceived it. And the darkness in black was a point of neutrality. And then the light within that could be seen both as the last flicker and the early spark of something different. And so somewhat it feels like the end of an era and the beginning of something completely new. Obviously, we go through revolutions over time in history all the time, but at this certain moment, it felt like that to me, and it was powerful enough to kind of, manifest itself in this way. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. And it's interesting that you used the word inviting, actually, and saying that maybe this installation didn't feel like that for you, because this space is just such a zen space to me. And I frequently find myself, I like to walk through my galleries once I've installed a show. I'm the type of person that I'm always so thankful to work in a museum space because I get to be surrounded by art day in and day out, and I really take the time to do that. And so I quite frequently find myself jumping into the galleries in between meetings, and I am often in your space because there is just this incredible soundscape that I have to actually bring my phone with me when I go to the gallery to make sure that I'm not running late to meetings, because it does kind of absorb you. It's a very, I think it is a welcoming and inviting space, even though it isn't necessarily the types of colors that you would always associate with that type of language necessarily.
That was certainly the goal. It was just a challenge because I didn't know if I could pull it off, but it's always that for me. Like, it has to be inviting. But the challenge was, can I do this when I dial down the palette completely in a different direction? So yeah, we find you hunkering down in the back corner of the museum.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you're looking for
Thanks
me,
for
that's
disclosure.
probably where I am. Moira, I wanted to talk a little bit about, because you mentioned your collaboration with your husband, which I love when artists collaborate with each other and with non-traditional people. And I think I'm really interested in learning a little bit more about the data sets and how you decided to use the work from these radargrams and then incorporate it into the work that we see on view.
Yeah, I mean, I think, because I showed also the first, the first collaboration, and it seems to be, I think it's going to be this very experimental, and there's going to be a train of thought, I think, after we do like 3 or 4 of them. But at those, what I showed before in Maine, his research was, the radargram was the research he was doing up in Maine, and the residency we did together that I worked on that work for. And so he was actually looking at eskers, and these are like these kind of tubes of deposit that are left over from glaciers. And I then took that esker and made it into kind of a little woven green screen, and then it becomes this portal and kind of tubular kind of idea. And that's kind of, you never know what's going to happen. So I just get the drawing, and I call them drawings almost because they had that element to them. So then with the sinkhole, I feel like I got a little carried away on my side, but it started last summer at Calgras, where we had another residency together. And it's almost like, I think he gave me like number 5. And then I kind of created the narrative both as kind of within the 10 animated forms of the sinkhole. And he's really looking at the sinkhole before it's sunk, or potentially sunk. And so, but what I was kind of creating was this idea of this ground, like terrifying idea of something so stable and you are grounded, just kind of opening up. And it seemed to open up a whole other narrative, also kind of the ephemeral green screen that it kind of disappears into, bringing in my video kind of history. And then with the video itself, the animation, kind of my nervous energy, both in textile making and the animation kind of work together for this one.
Carin, I'd love for you to talk about the way that you kind of use the beauty of the really photorealistic paintings that you do and the like remnants of these living trees. I see them as a really poignant way to kind of show the current moment, but also what a future could look like. And so I'd love for you to talk about how you incorporate this idea of balance between beauty and something that could be really haunting.
Thank you, Adeze. When I'm trying to fully honor the species that we stand to lose, I spend enormous amounts of time and attention to detail to capture the full glory of the trees. And so I'm working in there inch by inch, day by day, month by month, into years and years. And my frustration with the amount of time that it was taking me to capture their magnificence while we were losing trees at such a rapid rate led me to the idea of the ghost forest, because that's what's actually happening right now while I'm painting, little inch by inch, trying to get everyone else engaged and aware of the magnificence that is being lost every single day. And so it is life versus death if we don't do something about it. And there are organizations that are working on it, but they need to be supported. So, and I don't know if any of you have read Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, but she talks about reciprocity and gift economies as opposed to the capitalist economy that we have right now. And capitalism works to an extent, but we're using trees as, resource, as opposed to part of the natural world that we need to support because it supports us. So thank you.
And then I want to stick with you for just one more moment. You talked about this push and pull between the immediacy of what's physically happening in the world and how long it takes you to do this work. And I think that that's something that I'd love for you to expand on a little bit. You talked about it earlier, but I'm really interested in that moment of tension where you're physically making this work to have a cause, to talk about something that impacts us all, but you know that it takes such a huge amount of time that the immediacy of what needs to happen so that we can be less reactive as a species to the I guess it's trauma that we've caused to the earth. It's kind of in a disconnect with the time that it takes you to make this work. And so I'm really curious about how that tension you found other ways that has kind of come into your practice.
So that is where the ghost forest was born, because those can be made in a few weeks after I get the photographs. Of course, I have to travel to them and get the photographs at the right time of year in order for it to have the ghostly appearance. But I can get those done in a few weeks as opposed to the year and a half that it takes me. And so I do feel like there's more immediacy in that format than there is in the very time-consuming honoring of the tree that we are going to lose.
Thank you. And Gabino, I'd like you to talk a little bit about your engagement with Indigenous storytelling, because you talked about the Bible a little bit earlier today, but I think that there is this really intricate history that you're putting on view in this show and how it intersects with the political history of the 20th century and how you're engaging with that in this particular body of work.
So the Bible was just an example. It's a metaphor.
Of course.
I'm not trying to indoctrinate anybody here, okay, guys? That's not the kind of artist I am. But yes, to answer your question, the intersection of indigenous storytelling and history with current political movements, it intersects both the personal and then the research that I do. So the personal aspect of it is I have a very direct engagement with my family's heritage and culture. So my family is mixed. And in the Spanish language, there's this word that I really do not like to use. or say, but I'm going to say it. The word is mestizo, right? And the mestizo, the word itself, back during colonial times, had a very, very interesting meaning. And it was close to being a bastard. So when I heard about that, I'm like, damn, that's definitely not a cool word to use at all. To even relate or to even call myself a mestizo. I'm like, okay, so definitely not going to use that word. But I come from a very small town in Puebla named Santana de Cosla. The population of that town was mostly Nahuas. But now the majority is mixed. So some of the families still speak the Nahuatl, but I don't speak that. I don't understand it. I came here when I was 7 years old. I illegally crossed the border, 7 years old, back in 1993, I'm sorry, with my sister and my mom. Now, I'm not trying to give you a tragedy story here. Back in the day, it was easy. It was just lifting the fence, but of course, there was a lot of political aspects happening between North America and between USA, Mexico, Canada. And I'll get into that later. But to answer your question, the term Nepantla, which I was talking a few minutes ago, which is a Nahuatl word that represents the in-betweenness. And I'm just gonna rephrase it again. So the Nepantla is the space between two bodies of water, the space between two worlds, and it's where you're not this or that, but you're in the midst of transformation. So this word, this concept was used by the Chicano movement that was happening during the 60s and 70s. And they used it in anthropology, Chicano social commentary, criticism, literature, art. And I heard about this term when I was reading Borderlands La Frontera by Gloria Anzaldúa. She is a Chicana poet, a Chicana writer, she was. And she was a Chicano activist. And I want to read to you guys this poem that is found in the book 6 of Florentine Codexes. It says, this is what it says: "We travel along a mountain ridge while we live on earth, an abyss joining on either side. If you stray too far one way or the other, you will fall away. Only by keeping to the middle way does one walk on and live." So I feel the Nahuatls trying to survive during colonial times. They're like, either we gotta but staying in the middle is like, I feel like they were transforming, right? And it connects so much to the Chicano movement here in the USA. For example, there's this mythical story of the Mexica, of the mythical city named Aztlán. And a lot of the Chicanos, they refer to that land, the Mexican territories that were annexed by the USA during the Mexican and American War. But the Chicanos use this concept, this mythological story of Aztlán to connect with their heritage and past. So I'm trying to connect with my heritage and past. That's a personal aspect of it. And then I want to understand what happened, so I need to do research. And that research goes, like I was telling you before, it's almost like a telescope. Have you guys heard of the new James Webb telescope that just flew 2 years ago, right? December 25th, 2021. And this telescope is pretty much we can see the past of how galaxies were forming. So the light that comes from the sun to Earth, it takes 8 minutes, right? The light that goes from different planets to our stars is billions or millions of years. So we're looking at the past, So I'm doing the same thing with my work, you know, and I'm trying to connect it to and that's the idea of like, I was born in Mexico, lived in New York City in Spanish Harlem, you know, represent from NYC, and then I moved to Florida 2 years ago. So there's also, I'm trying to do this research because I feel like there's like, I just want to be a part of the conversation of painting, but also of what Chicano art can become, or what Mexican art can be. How can Mexican artists be seen in the USA? You know, so this the Chicano movement appropriated the term Aztlán to establish the indigenous nature of their culture, a characteristic central to their philosophy. The appropriation of the myth took place during the Crusade for Justice Youth Conference, held in Denver in March 1969. So the myth of Aztlán was mentioned in a document written by Rodolfo González, El Plan Espiritual de Aztlán, or the Spiritual Plan of Aztlán. His document encouraged Chicanos to strive for economic culture, political freedom, and ultimately self-determination. And these words, it's not just for Chicanos, right? You know, it's for everybody, man. And so that's how I feel like that's the intersect. That's, of course, that's not a current, but I mean, it's a 20th century art, political movement. But this movement has a lot of connection, even what was going on, you know, with the farm workers here. Of course, they're undocumented here in Florida. So, you know, it's just like, okay, so I want to look at the past through this lens, and then I want to be able to learn it in the present and hope to use it in the future to create better things. So that's what my work has something to do with. It's like an object. It's an object of information.
Thank you. So I want to be mindful of time. I have more questions, but I am being told that I should ask if you have questions for the artists. So if there are any questions in the audience, please let us know. Or I can keep asking questions because I have some other ones. Bim?
Hi. Hello. Okay. I had two separate questions for two separate artists. The first was for Carrington. I love your use of the way in which the material you use to kind of frame the moving image work adds to another layer of meaning. So with Reimagined Memories, that kind of tin roof, which you already spoke about, that kind of deterioration also speaks to like the deterioration of memory and the way that we kind of, you know, part of it is blocked and there's like a beautiful kind of, you know, loss there that's very evident. And I was curious to learn a little bit more about the structure for the Black Girl piece, especially the kind of VHS tapes that you have around it, in the context of a kind of contrast to very kind of Black-centered space, but then a lot of the other films are very much part of what we might call white culture.
Yes.
And I wanted to know whether or not that was an intentional move on your part. And I'll just ask the other question just to get them both out there. The other one was for Francesco, regarding this kind of bodily quality to the work in the installation. I was wondering if there's this kind of biomorphism or this kind of almost like a sense of the human body present in your approach to abstraction in your work in general. I found that centerpiece to be quite yonic, for lack of a better word. And there's ways in which it harpens back to like these different kinds of curvatures of Art Deco or 80s reminiscence of Art Deco. And it almost makes you feel like you're inside a body. I think that kind of redness and the colors and the plays with light very much evoke maybe what Adeze is saying about like wanting to be in that space and live in that space. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that, whether or not that's, you know, something you're thinking through in this work. Because the sleekness, I think, might be hiding something more bodily than you've gotten to speak to today. So thank you both.
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first? So to answer your question about the framing of Black Girl in Montage, yes, it was absolutely intentional. I am from a very small, rural, white town, so going to school, going to places, anything, I'm surrounded by like beauty standards of whiteness that don't necessarily like apply to me. So when I would go home and see those shows, that was kind of like my little escape, which is why I decided to put that together. So when that work was first shown, it was in a show about forts, and like I thought of something for fortitude. So at that point in time, you could kind of like walk into a space with the VHS tapes. I didn't really want to do that here. I wanted to play with something else. But during that show, it was kind of like you're sitting in this space that is like inside, like this kind of personal and intimate space. There we go, sorry. Intimate space while being surrounded by these external standards that don't necessarily belong or apply to me. And yeah, is that good? Is that a good answer? Thank you.
Okay, to your question, make no mistake, the work is about humanity. Don't be fooled by the abstraction and like the almost, sterile environment. It is really my way of adding to what we perceive to be reality, the layers we don't talk about. But of course, it's totally about us. And yes, the body is very much central to all of it. And you speak of the sculptures, particularly, the goal really was to create something that was, that you really couldn't ignore the sexuality of it, let's call it that. And yet it was really trying to be all-encompassing. So it's neither male nor female or anything else. It's really just the multidimensional, all-encompassing version of the temple that is you, in a way, you know? Jesus.
Okay. Do we want to wrap up? Okay. Oh, we have one.
Okay, we're hitting Francesco today. Back to what she was mentioning about the colors of the room and the tones that we're setting. Before you mentioned that your work was very pastel colored, very inviting was the word that Adeze used at one point, if I'm not wrong. This transitioned into something that, yes, it's a place that you want to be in, but it's a place that is luring you in instead of inviting you. What made you make that transition? Because you also before said that the work speaks to you and that you have been transitioning in the way that you have been working and creating these forms and starting building these spaces. So was it something in the work that made this transition from inviting to luring, or is it something in you that is forced into the work now?
Okay. I was hoping to have more time to think. That's a hard one. You're making me think now. It's definitely more challenging, and it was harder. And I think that's really just a reflection of the times I think we live in. That, there's this general sense of uncertainty in so many ways. We're divided into so many different camps. There's a pro and a con to every single situation. There's a million opinions to everything. And so I didn't want the entry point to be easy. So now that you kind of posed the question, made me think about it. Yes, as you're walking in, you're almost assuming there's something menacing around the corner. And then the result is a feeling of hopefully overwhelming calmness in a way. And I find that to be just one step further in something that I've been trying to achieve this whole time. And hopefully that worked out, you know.
Thank you. Well, thank you to everyone on the panel. I really appreciated hearing more from you, and I hope that this was illuminating to our audience. Before we leave, I do want to plug that we will have a publication coming out fairly soon that memorializes the show. And, you know, I love when we do books as an institution because exhibitions last for a couple of months, but books are forever. So be on the lookout for that coming soon. And is there anything else you want me to highlight that's coming up in the museum? Jazz? Oh, yes. So every last Friday of the month, we have a jazz concert on our plaza. It's free. There are incredible vendors, food from the area, and it's always a wonderful time. So that's coming up soon. But I would be remiss if I didn't tell you all about this concert that's coming up September 8th with Lonnie Holly. So he'll be coming back to town. He'll be performing in our plaza space. You should definitely get tickets for that. It's coming out very soon. And thank you so much for spending your Wednesday evening with us. We hope that you come back to MOCA soon.